Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to this meeting of Audit and Governance Committee. Perhaps we could just go round the room, as it were, in order, just introducing yourselves and your role here today. That would be very helpful, I think. So perhaps start with me. I'm Peter Spink. I'm the Isle of Wight Councillor for Freshwater North and Yarmouth, and the newly appointed chair today. So if I'm not entirely au fait with all the order of things, then please forgive me, but I'm going to do my best. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Councillor Adams, Nettlestone in Seaview, and like Peter, newly appointed member of the Audit and Governance Committee.
Claire Richardson, Councillor for Tail, Knighton, Shorewell, Whitwell, and I've done audit for a year or two now, so I know most of the faces. Thank you.
Andrew Garrett, Councillor for Parkerston Honeyhill, Deputy Leader of the Council now, and the former Chair of this committee. And I'll do my best to cheer you on, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Kevin Souter, I'm the partner in charge of the audit from your external auditors, Ernst & Young LLP.
Yeah, Jason Jones, External Audit Manager, EY.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Geraint Newton, member of the audit team.
Mary Hobbleday, Service Director for Finance.
Chris Ward, Director of Finance since 2016.
Sharon Betts, Director of Corporate Services with responsibility for property.
Debbie Downer, Strategic Manager, Organisational Intelligence, here to present AGS and the Risk Register.
I need to read out the fire regulations. There are no planned fire drills during this meeting. So if the fire alarm does sound, then please treat it as a proper emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route. The nearest escape route is via the stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber or indeed the public gallery. Exit via the door at the back of the building and walk across the inner car park to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. The lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency, and please do not re-enter the building until you're advised it's safe to do so by a member of staff. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies and changes in membership, if any. There are no changes in membership in the sense of substitutions, and there's one apology from Councillor Warren Drew. Next item on the agenda are the minutes. To confirm as true record the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of March, which appear at page 5 of the bundle. Do we have any comments on the minutes? Councillor Garrett.
As the chair of that meeting, I will move that those minutes, if you wish, Chair.
Yes.
I'd second that.
One matter that's been suggested to me is that under item 57, members' questions time, it would be helpful if the committee agrees that a response to a councillor's question should be appended to the minutes. I don't know how people feel about that, but it seems sensible to me if that's possible. Yes, there seems to be general agreement with that. And indeed, it should apply to, it seems to me, to public questions as well. Thank you. So, declarations of interest. I'll invite any councillor to declare an interest that they might have in on the matters on the agenda. Thank you. No declarations of interest. Item number 4, election. This being our first our first meeting since the a change, as it were, of composition. Election of a vice chair. Do I have any nominations for a vice chair? Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to nominate Councillor Claire Critchison for that position.
I think there's no doubt that he certainly has considerable knowledge, but he was shaking his head vehemently to your left. I think Councillor Garrett's quite busy as vice chair. I think he feels, I don't want to speak for you, but you refused a nomination as chair on the basis you were simply a little too busy in your new role as deputy of the deputy leader of the council. And I dare say you feel, kind though it is of Councillor Churchman to nominate you, I dare say that you feel the same in relation to that.
You read my mind, Chair. Yes, and the last thing you also want is somebody backseat driving to you as well.
Not sure about that, but I understand that as the new deputy leader, there's a considerable amount of work. And I'm grateful to you, in fact, for remaining on the committee, because I'm sure we will all benefit from your experience over the years and if I may say so, the way in which you've chaired the meetings in the past. So thank you for that. Do I have a seconder for the nomination of Councillor Critchison? Councillor Adams, thank you. If we're all agreed, I'm happy to support that. So good, Councillor Critchison is appointed. Question time. I understand there are no public questions. There is a moving on then to, unless there's anyone in the gallery who wishes to ask a public question, there are no written questions. Seems not, no. So moving on to item number 6, members' question time. There is a question, a written question from Councillor Jarman. He sent an email to me this morning and indeed to Democratic Services that he apologises for not giving a clear day's notice, but he considers that it is urgent and he'd ask the committee to consider it under the 1 hour, I think it is, rule. I'm happy to consider it unless there's any objections. I dare say we'll probably have to give a written answer in due course, but perhaps that question could be read out even though he's not here so that everyone knows what it is. Thank you. Councillor Jarman, I'm sorry, I didn't spot you online there. So would you like to read out your question?
Thank you. Somebody's just unmuted me, which is very kind. So thank you very much for that. Yes, sorry that the question only came out very shortly. Do you want me to read out the full question or shall I just paraphrase it slightly?
I think paraphrasing it would be sufficient. Thank you.
Okay, so the question related to the recording of meetings. There've been a couple of instances recently where, because I understand in one case, because we don't have an automated recording system, it's done manually, and parts of meetings may not have been recorded. But in another one, specifically relating to the floating bridge, where an edited version of the meeting only has been put online, I don't believe that we have in our constitution any measure that allows for censorship by the council of the contents of a meeting. And I was seeking agreement from the committee, because I believe it is a constitutional matter, that all meetings should be put in full online and uploaded and should not be censored in any way. And indeed, if there have been any examples of censoring, and I'm happy to provide a couple of those, then they should be overwritten and revised with the full version of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. think we'll provide a full written report in due course. But does anyone or any members of the committee have a view? Councillor Jarman has asked, as it were, for the committee on the basis it's a constitutional issue to whether they have a view. It does seem to me that the recording should be a full and complete recording of what is said, subject to any recording difficulties or something which should be specified. But I don't know. I think, first of all, Councillor Churchman has a point.
Yes, I totally agree with Councillor Jarman. There is so much conjecture and misinformation about the floating bridge that it's got out of hand. We should be fully informed. It is council taxpayers' money. Originally, we were given money, 3.5 million, I think, from the LEP, the Local Enterprise Partnership. Since then, there have been series and series of errors, whatever. However, it should be in public. The public should be made aware of all the different facets of this, because, as I said, there's so much misinformation going around at the moment that it really is ridiculous. And we need to have a clear and proper understanding of the floating bridge. If problems, they should be there out in the open so that the council and the officers can make informed decisions about the future, either operation renewal or whatever. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. Councillor, was it Critchison? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would like, before we did reply, that there was more information about what meeting it was and whether it was a full public meeting. Because I don't know what context we're talking and whether it's what reasons anything would have been removed from it, whether it was a staff issue or a councillor or something. So I think perhaps we need to be sure of the context of it first. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Critchison. I agree we need to know the context on an individual basis. But the principle, subject to that context, the principle I think we're being asked to at least decide is that without further explanation, the entire meeting should be recorded, because otherwise it's not a true record of what took place. Now, if there's anything which is confidential or unconstitutional or for any other reason can't be published, and there have to seem to be good reason, then I'm sure that that would take place if the monitoring officer advises that. But in principle, I think we could give the assurance today, subject to the committee agreeing, that in principle it should be a full recording, subject only to a proper case, as it were, for excluding certain items. And we'll give a full written report setting out some examples of what could be excluded. Would you be content with that?
If it's a public meeting that has already been taken place in full public display, then I think then that shouldn't matter if it has been.
I think Councillor Jarman's question relates to either full council meetings or a committee meeting that's held in public. I don't think it would relate to when the meeting goes into private proceedings. So it's simply a public record. And it's to some extent a better public record than the minutes, because the minutes are only a summary, as we're reminded from time to time, whereas the recording is verbatim. Thank you.
I did. No, I fully support this. And if we were speaking about the floating bridge, I was at that meeting the other week, and what I would like to say was the only reason I could see for that being censored, not censored, being edited, whatever, it's some of the councillors got quite passionate at that meeting, which I thought some of the wording was a little bit heavy towards the officers. I wasn't fully in agreement with that, but that's passion with what we do. I don't think, having said that, I don't think there was anything on there that needed editing or cutting out. And if it's a public meeting, I think the residents, if they're looking at it, they need to see that and see that passion. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So I'd just like to say I support this initiative.
Councillor Garrett.
Chair, it seems that this might have been related to a members' briefing rather than a meeting of the council or of one of its committees. Those are distinct in law, and we would need to be very careful about that, because of course people can withdraw their right to be recorded in certain circumstances. So and also members' briefings are intended to be sufficiently very candid, and that people are feeling that every last word of theirs is being recorded and rebroadcast. It may be that members might want to withdraw from taking part in such meetings. The openness to of local government proceedings regulations, if that's what they're called, the local government bodies regulations 2014 are pretty clear on the openness side of things. So I think we need to be, I don't know if this is what Councillor Jarman is referring to, a members briefing, but that is distinct from a public meeting, a meeting held in public under those under the law and with the recording under those regulations. Certainly I would feel uncomfortable finding that every last word of mine is recorded, because sometimes it is necessary to have a candid discussion about things which helps inform us, but we may hold ourselves back, or officers may hold themselves back as well from giving us those candid responses. So there is a balance to be struck here. But if it is about a public meeting, then the recording should be available in full. And indeed, I've made an inquiry around that relating to another committee, which the recording isn't quite available in full, it seems. So.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. I agree. I hadn't, perhaps it's my fault, I don't know, I hadn't interpreted it as being related to briefing as such. I thought it was in relation to meetings in general, but perhaps what I could do is summarise, if everyone agrees, summarise what I think the feeling of the meeting is, and then ask Councillor Jarman if he has a supplementary, and then provide a written answer, which will no doubt summarise what our view is and also give specific, perhaps, guidance as to what is and isn't acceptable. So in that case, Councillor Jarman, you'll have heard what we said. The consensus of opinion is that if it's a public meeting, as opposed perhaps to a briefing, but if it's a public meeting held either full council or of a committee, then it should be recorded in full, unless there's any reason why that can't be so, in which case those reasons will be stated if and when any editing takes place, and indeed open to consideration and objection. That wouldn't apply, of course, to the parts of the meeting that go into camera, as it were, and are heard privately. Do you have a supplementary? And I'll accept a comment, as it were, as opposed to a precise question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my comment is I was not intending it to cover the confidential parts of meetings which are held in camera. Whilst it is a public meeting, the norm, I believe, is that those are uploaded onto YouTube for public dissemination. And I can see very little reason at all, if ever, why there would be any censorship of the content of those meetings. For the ones which are of another type, whether they are training or member briefings, those are not normally available on YouTube, but they are available on Teams. And I think the same provision should apply to them. If it is a member briefing or if it is a training session, then it should be a full recording. And my justification for that would be that there are many members who cannot attend member briefings or who look at training material at a later date. And I think it's beholden on the council to ensure that they have full access to both the member briefings and the training sessions. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. We'll provide a written response setting out the views that we've expressed today. Thank you very much. My microphone. Item number 7, report of external auditors. I first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to both of you gentlemen for attending today. And also thank you for what was, in my view, and I'm sure other committee members would endorse this, a very thorough and helpful report on both the audit plan for the Isle of Wight Council and also for the pension fund. Would it be possible, because they are quite long reports, so would it be possible both for the benefit of members of this committee, who I'm sure have read them all, but nevertheless, would it be possible for the benefit of all, and also the public gallery, which there are some people in, to just summarize? I know it's difficult to summarize a full report like that, but if you could just summarize the role of the external auditor, how in just bullet points, as it were, that role is carried out, and express any concerns, because there are some concerns expressed in the report, expressed any concerns at the current time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, that's no problem at all. So our role as the external auditor of the council is essentially twofold. We are required under the Local Audit and Accountability Act and the National Audit Office's Code of Audit Practice to give an opinion on your accounts for each financial year. And that covers both the council and the pension fund. And we're also required to assess the arrangements you have in place to give value for money on behalf of the taxpayers and any other stakeholders. So those are our two key responsibilities. Now, our audit plans set out our risk assessment in effect of those responsibilities. So we go through a risk-based planning procedure to identify where we think it is possible that our work needs to have additional attention, because there are, in the case of the financial statements, risks where the accounts might be misstated, or in case of our value for money responsibilities, where it may be the potential that the arrangements are not sufficient, and therefore we need to report those, report a gap that the council will then need to take action about. So that provides the overview of our responsibilities. So within our plans for the council and the pension fund respectively, we set out the result of that risk assessment process. So we draw to your attention where there is a potential. So if I refer to the council's plan, if I refer to the summary dashboard on page 17, so that's where we present the potential risks to the financial statements audit. So we draw out, for example, the first two of those risks. Sorry, that's page 17 of the pack. So we draw out our first risks about the fraud risk assessment. So we've got a general risk of fraud, which we cover on all engagements. It's otherwise commonly known as management override. So we've always got to be conscious that management who put the control environment in place, by putting that control environment in place, they know how to step around it. So we need to make sure we're cognizant of that, and we're undertaking some procedures to make sure it's not happening. And then we've also got to look at the potential for fraud in revenue recognition, which is a requirement of us. And so for this council, in common with a majority of other local authorities of the audit, we believe there is the potential to misrepresent capital and revenue expenditure. So we're going to put some additional focus into that area on top of the general level of focus we put through our audit. So it's about focusing our work critically on the risks and where we identify there is the most potential for things to be misrepresented in your accounts. Now, in order for our work to be conducted effectively, we can't do that to the exact penny of the accounts, because it would take as long for us to do that level of work as it would take for the council officers to put through all the transactions for a financial year. So we have to do that with a concept of materiality, which is essentially the margin for error. So how much could a set of accounts potentially be, not quite absolutely correct, but how bad would it have to be before they actually misrepresent the finances of the council? And so the reader would get a very different review than what you should be projecting. So on page 19 of the report, we set out our initial view of materiality and how we calculate it based upon a percentage of the gross expenditure within your accounts. And we'll update that figure. So the figure in the paper in front of you today is based upon the expenditure in your last set of accounts. We'll update that based upon the accounts that were actually published for audit. So it'll go up slightly because your expenditure has gone up slightly between years. So that's how we look at our key responsibilities in terms of the financial statements. And then in conducting our audit over the next few months, we will undertake a programme of work focusing on those areas that we put in our plan. And we will endeavour to come back to you, I think it's a November or December meeting, with the results of our work to show you what we have found in respect to those accounts and whether there are any issues that we need to bring to your attention before you actually approve those accounts on behalf of the council for the year. So if I then look at our value for money responsibilities, so as I said earlier, we are required to look at the arrangements that you have in place to ensure value for money. So the concept of value for money is very subjective. We can't actually make a judgment whether something is value for money or not. There are too many views. There are aspects in here about democracy and politics, so it is not our role to look at, properly taken decisions of the council that set out its policy and strategic direction. Now that is a matter for local democracy and why the councillors are elected by the public to represent them. But we do look and to see that decisions that are taken or arrangements that are put in place are done properly in accordance with, for example, the constitution of the council. And so that probably brings us to our two risks that we've got set out on page 33 of the plan this morning. So we've had a couple of issues that have been brought to our attention around the proper arrangements of governance. So one is through a whistleblowing disclosure that was made through the year. And the second is in relation to matters that were brought to our attention through the senior officers of the council, where those arrangements may not be working effectively. So we believe that both issues fall within our remit to look at the governance arrangements of the council within that value for money responsibility. And so in both cases, what we're looking at is to understand the exact specifics of the issue, to understand what has happened, to try and understand why, and then what has been done about it. But also in both respects, we've got a final bullet point that talks about looking at the underlying issues and considering if there are any other aspects that potentially impact upon our responsibilities. So again, it's risk focus, trying to understand whether it's a potential risk that those arrangements may not be correct and focusing in on those areas. Chairman, I hope that reasonably answers your question to set out responsibilities. I'd be happy to take any follow-up questions on the matters that I've covered in my presentation, and of course on any of the matters we've actually put in the detailed documents that are on your agenda this morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Souter. That's very helpful indeed. And I'm sure there'll be members of the committee who take up your invitation to ask questions. Is there anyone who'd like to ask questions of Mr. Souter? Councillor Churchman.
Yes, on page 32, which under value for money, I'm very concerned at your final paragraph regarding identified risks of significant weaknesses in the council's arrangements. I mean, can you expand on that slightly, or is that just a comment?
So, Councillor, as I said in my presentation, we go through a risk-based process and we look where there may be the potential for gaps in those arrangements, which in the case of what our responsibilities are, those gaps are classified as significant weaknesses. So, as I said, we've had two matters brought to our attention, one which are on page 33, one is for a whistleblowing issue, and the other is issues that have been brought to our attention by the statutory officers, and that's what we've described here. So we need to undertake a programme of work which we've set out to understand what those issues are, whether they are indeed weaknesses in the arrangements or not. And if they are, we will then come back and report accordingly, making recommendations how things should be improved. So at this point in time, it's a risk. There's potential. We now need to undertake that programme of work to satisfy ourselves whether there is an actual weakness or not.
Do you wish to ask a supplementary, Councillor Churchland? No. Councillor Critchison.
Thank you. I was reading about the phases of recovery, and is this achievable? And do you feel like it is sufficient for the recovery process of actually getting the audits back on track timeline wise? And then it also refers to the fact that obviously the council and mentions our section 151 officer, it's not particular to you, but that are we doing all we need as a council to get you the information to comply with those phases as well, please? Thank you.
Yes, so Councillor, in terms of the recovery, the national position and moving from what in your case is a disclaimed opinion back to a clean audit opinion over time, yes, I'm currently satisfied that those arrangements are in place. So one of the issues that led to a disclaimer in last year was the council didn't publish the accounts on time with the statutory timetable. Now, for this year, they have been published on time for the council. So we can get on with the audit as planned. The detailed aspects of that will start in September, but we've already raised a few questions in terms of initial observations on those accounts with officers. And so as we speak today, we are in a good position. We're certainly in a better position than last year. So fingers crossed, yes, we will start that rebuild process. Now, that rebuilding process will take time. It's not going to happen this year. So it will come over a matter of probably the next 2 or 3 years. But fingers crossed that will take place. And as of today, I don't have any concerns, especially about the information that is being due at this point in time. That's all been provided to us.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions from councillors on this? Councillor Churchman.
Sorry, I have one other query. Page 55 talks about material inconsistencies and misstatements, and it says which management has refused to revise. I mean, can somebody explain that to me? You're the audit.
Yes, so what we listed, so that the item is part of a number of items that we are required to communicate to you, which is listed on Appendix C of our report. So we set out what we have to report to you. That doesn't necessarily mean at this point in time there are going to be any issues. So in terms of, management refusing to provide information, hopefully there will be nothing of the kind to bring back to your attention. But if there is, that is a matter that we will have to bring to your attention and could affect our opinion. And it could, of course, then affect your decision whether you approve the accounts for the year or not. So hopefully there will be nothing to report. But if there is, it's just listing out things that we are required to bring to your attention if they happen.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. It's not in the way of a question, but more to comment. I think having been through this process a few times now, it is really important to understand that there are these requirements on things to discover, and if they are discovered, they are reported to us. That's our role. And I think it's really important that all of us as members understand that. So if members of the public read and read into some of these comments, things which actually they may misinterpret as meaning there are actually weaknesses or failures to disclose or whatever, that we are well educated on that. So if our external auditors or indeed our internal auditors have any sort of materials they think we as members should be reminding ourselves of, and I count myself in that as much as anybody else, that would be helpful. It's also things like, just because there is a risk of something, that does not mean that a thing has happened. And even if a thing has happened, it is a risk. Risks can be mitigated. So things can be in place for that. So Mr. Souter highlighted page 33, which is an area where I had a particular feeling about recognizing that risk of weakness is not weakness in itself, but if weakness is discovered, it can be mitigated and corrected. So I think the message, if anybody were to be watching this recording, going back to our previous discussion, I'd like members of the public to understand that we as committee members are doing what we can to make sure things are being done properly. And just because there's reference to things not being done properly, it doesn't mean that things are not being done properly. It's in fact the right and proper thing to do to discover, and end up going around in circles on this, if things are not being done properly. I'll stop there because.
No, thank you, Councillor Garrett. It's helpful by underlining, as it were, by pointing out potential difficulties. You're quite right, it can be seen as being an actual difficulty. And indeed, members of the public should, in my view, take encouragement from the fact that the auditors, in my opinion, have carried out a very full report, giving possible, as opposed to, in some cases, actual, as opposed to difficulties. One matter which did cause me concern, and it's been alluded to, but I just would read the little paragraph, that this caused me concern, but then I'm relatively new to this committee, and it may fall into Councillor Garrett's observations. But I was concerned by, on page of the bundle, it's page 15 at the bottom of the page, and actually what is actually written there, because my understanding is that in 2023 to 2024, the auditors were unable to approve, as it were, the final accounts, and that the prognosis is, and I'll just read this, we did not gain assurance over the closing balances in 2023 to 24. Consequently, we do not have assurance over the opening balance for 24 to 25. This means we do not have assurance over in-year movements and some closing balances for 24 to 25. Although we will continue to undertake work in 24 to 25 to rebuild assurance ahead of the backstop date, subject to guidance, we will not be able to obtain sufficient evidence to have reasonable assurance over closing balances. And this is really my main concern. We therefore expect to again issue a disclaimed audit opinion in 24-25. And a disclaimed audit opinion is one, in common parlance, that you can't sign off as external auditors. Now, should I be concerned about that or not? And should this committee be concerned about that or not?
Yes and no. So your interpretation is right. We are not going to be in a position that we will be able to give an unqualified audit opinion at the end of this year. So that should be in general concerning. But it does relate to stuff that has happened in the past, and we can't go back and redo the past. We don't have the resources, we don't have the ability, we don't have the time to do something. So we have to work in terms of the audits to go from where we are today and work forward. So what we can do this year, we can review the closing balances of the accounts. We can review the majority of those transactions that have happened in the year. But what we don't have the ability is to look back over the last 2 years and rebuild the assurances for the accounts we couldn't look at. So by looking forward, We will report to you the issues that have come to our attention. We will report to you the transactions for the year and the closing balances, but we are likely still to end up with a disclaimed audit report. When we come to the year after, we will continue building on that process. So we will be able to undertake more assurance over more transactions, and over time, the disclaimer will move probably to a qualified opinion and then through to an unqualified opinion again, assuming that nothing else comes up. So yes, it should be concerning because it's not a great place to be. But as of today, we have that program in place over the next couple of years to rebuild the assurance. And assuming it all goes fine with no issues coming to our attention, you should be able to take a lot of assurance from what we can provide to you in our reports, even though ultimately, when we are, when we're actually writing the final opinion in your accounts, it may still say disclaimed. So it's a period of rebuild over time. And that's how I think the members of this committee should interpret our work over the next couple of years.
Thank you. I find that very helpful and puts my mind at ease to a large extent. The only other question that I have is that I've read somewhere, and my page reference is letting me down, but somewhere I've read that one of the most likely areas are of, as I understand it, perhaps being unable to reconcile opening and closing balances is inappropriate capitalization, is the expression I've written down, of revenue expenditure. Is that a future possible concern, or is it an existing concern which you've not yet been able to reconcile? Thank you.
Yep, so inappropriate capitalisation, so we have that risk on page 24 of today's pack. So this is part of our fraud risk assessment. So we have to look at where is the potential that officers can deliberately manipulate the accounts. So one of the areas they could potentially do this is by capitalising items that should go through the general fund, therefore improving the balance of the general fund, knocking on through to council tax decisions. So this is, I think, referring back to Councillor Garrett's summary, this is an area of potential that we have recognised and that we need to look at. Because it's in the plan at this point in time, it doesn't mean it has happened. We haven't undertaken our audit yet, but we're signalling we are going to focus on this area because it possibly could happen in the context of a local authority. And if you were comparing our audit plans across most of our local authorities, you will see similar risks because that incentive is basically across all local authorities.
Thank you. That's very, very reassuring. And finally, I think really you've answered this, so forgive me if it's repetition, but you have said that there are no alarm bells ringing, as it were, for the current situation. So can we take it, therefore, that I'm sure you've looked at the papers in relation to the internal report that form part of our papers? And are you content that we're, as a council, as it were, getting ourselves up to date and also dealing with matters properly?
I think that would be taking it too far at this point in time, Councillor. We set out the plan of what we need to do, and we need to go through those processes to ensure we can come to that judgment, which will happen in due course. So that would be fettering my discretion if I made a comment like that today without actually doing the work. So to be clear, I can't give you that assurance today because we haven't done our work. We've got the risks that we see as a risk to our work. We will undertake that programme of work. We will report back to you in due course. But I can't give you an opinion of how I feel now because we haven't done that work yet.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any? Councillor Critcher, sir.
Thank you. It was regarding as Councillor Garrett was talking about the risks and significant risk, and it was a new risk, was the IFRS leases and the PFI items, and that they could be significant, and because they are a new risk, I just wanted to flag that up at this time, that perhaps we should be aware of that and make sure that that is dealt with as well as possibly can be from both sides, really, that that's obviously in a significant area. So that was all at this stage. Thank you.
Spare me one moment, please. Good. Well, I think we'll leave that agenda item there. There are no further questions. Well, there is now part B of 7, which is the Isle of Wight Pension Fund. And perhaps I could ask for, again, a similar, very helpful summary of that. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's very similar in respect to the pension fund. We undertake an audit risk assessment at the start. In terms of the pension fund, we only look at the opinion on the financial statements. The value for money arrangements, because you are the administering authority, are captured within the council's report. So in terms of the pension fund, we pretty much have the same risks as the previous year. And that's probably not unusual because the pension fund doesn't change in terms of what it does. It collects the money in from the employers and the employees, and then it pays out the benefits to the pensioners. And in the meantime, with any surfeit cash, it invests that money to ensure that it's creating a return. So that's the extent of our responsibilities in terms of the pension fund. And we've highlighted the risks that we brought out, which are particularly in terms of understanding the valuation of those hard to value assets, which are not publicly available. So you can't look, for example, on the FTSE and find out the published and traded values. You have to look behind in terms of the accounts of those investments. So that's where we will be focusing. I think in terms of the pension fund, the only other aspect I need to draw to the committee's attention is that we put in the audit plan the timing of the pension fund this year, and we set out that we were going to be commencing the audit in June. Now, unfortunately, that's not been the case because the council was only able to publish the accounts for the pension fund in mid-July, so we couldn't start earlier. So the timetable as we've set out, we probably can't meet that one. So we're probably unlikely to report to September as originally planned, which means we'll probably come back to you in December meeting. So just to draw that to your attention at the moment. But we do have those accounts now. The information is being provided to us. So we've got started. It's just a little later than we'd originally anticipated. So those were the issues I just wanted to draw out in terms of the pension fund. And once again, happy to take any questions you might have on the rest of that document.
Thank you very much, Mr. Souter. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Churchman.
Not so much a question, a statement. Our pension fund apparently is in a very good state at the moment. And I think Mr. Ward, Chris Ward would agree with me. The problem is we have the government interfering in the LGPS, Local Government Pension Scheme. So what worries me most of all is that something perhaps Ernst Young will need to put at the back of their minds is that all this furore about moving from one pool into another, moving our pension funds around, is actually not going to save money. It is going to cost us millions over the next few years, whether Chris Ward would agree with me, but transferring assets around from one fund manager to another is an expensive occupation. And I think Councillor Jarman, who's chairman of the Pensions Committee, would agree with me. And I just don't know how we tackle this, but this is pensioners, past and present. It is their money which is going to be used. And I just wonder what Ernst Young think about this. Do you have a view, or are you just when I say sitting back and watching. Thank you.
Unfortunately, that is out of our remit, and so no, we don't have a view. It's a national policy decision by central government, and I'm afraid our responsibility is to give an opinion upon the accounts. We're not able to comment on national political decisions, I'm afraid.
Any other questions from committee? Councillor Adams.
If I appreciate you can't comment, could our section 151 officer comment? Sorry about that question. I just thought it was a fair question.
Well, it's a very fair question. And I think all I can say is there's a difference of opinion, which is the opinion that has been pulled together on an evidential basis by the access group of authorities in relation to whether the individual funds within access should join another pool or not, was that the access evidence suggested that it would be more financially beneficial to our members to remain as a single pool, but it would have to go through a process in order to remain as a single pool, in effect to become a regulated authority. The government took a different view, which they have expressed to us. They have given us some indications of the rationale for their view, but we haven't seen the depth of evidence from the government that we have used in coming to our view initially, that it would be in the best interest of the Isle of Wight pension fund members to remain in an access pool as part of a regulated entity. I hope that answers the question, but all I can say is that there's a difference of view.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Adams? No. Councillor Jarman, I noticed that you've come up on the screen all alone, as it were. Does that mean that you've got you would like to ask a question, because you're entitled to, as I understand it, ask questions in the course of the meeting under agenda items? So perhaps you've just come up on your own on that screen automatically. I don't know, but I didn't want to pass over you if you did have a question.
That's very kind again, Chair. I think the problem with the video going in and out is something to do with Windows 11 and Teams rather than anything else, but I will take advantage, if I may, of the opportunity. I see two members of the committee have raised the question so far, Councillor Churchman and Councillor Adams, and I note the answer so far from Chris Ward. The issue we're faced with, and I believe it is something that may fall within the remit of the external auditors, is that the route that we had sought to follow was one of lower risk and lower cost. And the route which we are being required to follow is one of higher risk and higher cost, without recompense of the costs from central government, and without really being able to identify any mitigation that we can employ about managing those risks. So the question to the external auditors is this: is it not something that falls within the remit of an external auditor, where a body is incurring higher risks and higher costs unnecessarily, other than at a government dictate? Thank you.
So if this wasn't a central government decision, yes, it would fall within our remit. But unfortunately, as I understand, you are being told to, and therefore it is outside of our remit.
Councillor Jarman, do you have a supplementary?
Only an observation that I'd anticipated that would be the view. And I think the view that's been expressed by the external auditors would be very strongly supported by the Pension Committee from the discussions to date. And I think it echoes what the 151 officer himself has remarked. You know, this is something that is not of our making. These risks are not required. There is nothing other than a central government dictate which is directing us down this path. it is creating higher risks, a degree of hesitation, and potentially diversification of the access pool members in their views, and in a very short time scale. And it will, at the end of the day, cost the Isle of Wight Pension Fund dearly. And those monies, we should always remember, are not central governments to play with, nor are they the councils to play with. I'm using the word play there very specifically. They are the funds which are intended for the beneficiaries, those 18,000 members of the pension fund who will rely on that in their later years. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps I could just ask Mr. Ward, if I may, has the specific point that Councillor Jarman is making, that it's forcing us to take a higher risk and etc., would cost us money and also put us at a higher risk. Has that point been specifically made to the government? And if so, what was their response?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it has been made to the government. All of the Section 151 officers of all of the funds within Access wrote a very detailed letter to the government on this point exactly, amongst other points, actually. And also the Director of Access has also written specifically to government. In both instances, we have received a response from government, but the response to our probably was about a 8 to 10 page letter with some very detailed questions, was a response of about a page and a half, which from our perspective, our hope was that we would have the evidential basis upon which to go back to our own pension fund committees to say that whilst we came to you to a previous committee and advised you what we felt was the best route forward for all of our members, taking seriously our fiduciary duties, the government have a different view and their evidential basis is as follows. And therefore, you could take the alternative view of the government and seek to join an alternative pool, because here is the evidence that supports it and therefore is aligned with our fiduciary duties. To date, we haven't had a response that really satisfies that position, but we are mindful that in all of our conversations with government, we've also taken legal advice in the background, and ultimately the government can legislate, and therefore our position is relatively weak in that regard.
Thank you. It's probably, but I'll take advice. Is it something, Megan, if I can ask you, is it within the remit of this committee to make any, with the help of the 151 officer, any responses or further points to be taken to the government, or is that really for the pension committee in collaboration with the 151 officer to do you think? Or maybe Mr. Ward, you can help. Would it be of assistance if this, I think the general view of the committee probably is that we want the most advantageous arrangement for our pensioners as we possibly can have. So that in mind, would it be constitutional, and B, would it be helpful if this audit committee gave some help to or assistance to both yourself and the pension committee?
My personal view is that I think the ship has already sailed. I think as Councillor Jarman has said, the programme is quite aggressive. We have by the end of September to notify government which pool it is the Isle of Wight Pension Fund wishes to join. I think at this stage, I don't think there's anything that this committee can do that the collective haven't already done. And now I think we need to be focused on making sure that the Isle of Wight pension fund enters into the best pool that it can, one that's most aligned with the Isle of Wight pension fund's objectives, and not to seek to detract from that. Otherwise, we may find ourselves in a position of not aligning ourselves with the best pool.
Thank you. Does the committee any further questions, or can we move on to the next? Thank you. Okay. Might I ask you to follow the same format of outlining your role as internal auditors, and where, as far as you're concerned, we are in progress, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So yeah, our role as internal audit is a statutory role, and that statutory duty comes under the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015. It's our role to evaluate the risk management and control and governance processes within the council. How we do that as the Isle of Wight is under a shared service. So we have a small internal team here at the Isle of Wight, and we share an chief internal auditor with Portsmouth City Council. And we also use the audit team at Portsmouth City Council to conduct some of the internal audits here under a collaborative working arrangement. The progress report that I'm bringing to you today is the report that this committee will receive on a regular basis throughout the year. So for those that haven't seen it before, this is the one that you'll be seeing most regularly. It updates the committee on the work we have conducted throughout the year of 24-25 and notes the progress against the audit plan, which is on page 98 of your pack. So you'll see the audit plan is complete for 24-25. Without going into the next item's agenda, that will be where I'll talk more about the overall audit opinion based on that audit plan. On page 99 of your pack will be a summary of the audits we've completed since the last period. So that will be since the last meeting of this committee. Those are the audits that have been completed, and there is a small summary of those. You will have also received a separate appendix on an audit on occupational therapy, which is limited assurance. At request of the committee previously, any audits that are rated as limited assurance come in full to you. So that is your second appendix outlining the details of that audit report. Section 9, which is page 105, shows all of the audits that have been completed in the year. As I say, that will probably be more relevant to the next item on the agenda, which is the annual audit opinion. So I won't go into that detail there, but those are all the audits that have been completed and when they are reported to this committee. That's all I propose saying on this paper at the moment, but happy to take any questions.
Councillor Churchman.
Yes, on page 103, we talk about transaction approval on procurement card payment. £385,000, over £250,000. I found that, I mean, if it was £38,000, I'd be querying it, but over £250,000. I also notice it's mentioned again on page 148. Well, as I said, as a taxpayer, even if I wasn't on this committee, I would be asking what on earth is going on. Thank you.
So you're correct to highlight that is a significant number of unauthorised payments. So we're not saying that all those transactions were incorrect or shouldn't have been, but correct, they weren't authorised in the process they should have been authorised. And that is something that we will be following up in future audits to see whether that's improved.
Have the council, in fact, now installed a system of more control over this, or is this just going to continue?
No, so if we raise what we call an exception or an issue, we will then go to management and ask them to come up with an agreed action as to how they plan to mitigate this risk moving forward. So there will be an agreed action that sits behind this, which will be then followed up in future audits.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to follow Councillor Churchman down that path. And the importance, obviously, of getting things right from now on. So we shouldn't be seeing as higher proportion. We shouldn't be we should ideally be seeing 0 as our percentage of those not correctly authorised. Well, has anything been discovered to suggest that that the sums of money were incorrectly used, or is this is a matter of the wrong process or an absence of process being properly followed? Because I think there's a subtlety in there, and it is wrong that things aren't correctly authorised. But if the monies are still properly used, that would give me as a member of the public a little more comfort than if there were evidence that they had been improperly used. And in what sort of areas are we seeing this happen, or is it across the authority?
So to the first point, what we'd have been able to do on the transactions not authorised, we'd have been able to do 100% population testing there. So we'd been able to see all of the transactions, see which ones were authorised and what weren't authorised. What we would have then done is sample checked those transactions to see whether they were, transactions that should have been spent, on council resources. So that would have been a lot smaller of a sample. So in that sample that we did, we didn't have any issues. Otherwise, we would have raised that in there as well. So there was no issues in the sample we looked at, but obviously that was a smaller sample compared to the whole population we looked at for authorisations. On the area on where they were, I would need to come back to you on that if there was any specific areas.
And if I can follow up on that, so I may have missed it. Quantifying the number of transactions, is this in the numbers of hundreds? I probably have missed it, but what I want to draw out is what sort of level of individual spend each time are we talking about?
I'd need to come back to you on the individual spend, but I think as Lizzie's appeared, she may have some more information.
Good morning, councillors, and apologies for not being in attendance. However, Paul and Garant are immensely competent. I just wanted to add, because I had joined the meeting, is that Councillor Garrett, you made reference to, was it the wrong process that was being followed? And in answer to your question, yes, it was the wrong process that was being followed, which is why I only had attributed a medium risk. So we would expect all automated processes to be followed. So the fact that we've highlighted that there were £300,000 worth that hadn't followed the correct process doesn't mean to say that they weren't duly authorised in advance.
Any other questions from councillors? Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. On the Mosaic report, two findings. One was high risk, and one was a medium risk, if I got that right. Medium risk was the learning of lessons. Where is the authority at in terms of those lessons learned?
Grant was the auditor that did that audit. I'll defer to Grant to answer that one.
So regarding lessons learned, as Paul highlighted, we will follow up this audit next year, and we will check that an appropriate exercise has been carried out to capture and propagate those lessons. What I'd also like to highlight at this point, I will be auditing the system replacement project in adult social care later on this year, and as part of that, we'll check that the lessons from the Mosaic project have fed across to the system replacement in adult social care.
Thank you for that, Chair. If I may pick up that, and I think it is right that this committee, and I hope it would continue to take the full reports on limited assurance areas. Are there any comments to be made? Because there are a number of high risks picked out in the occupational therapy report. Is there any comment on how that risk is now, its direction of travel? Is it going from high downwards, or is the level of mitigation going upwards? Trying to keep it in plain English, but I've probably lost myself on that.
So this will be an audit that we will be following up on in the 25-26 plan, which will then come back to you in the next progress report. But I don't know whether Laura wanted to make any comment on the progress to date.
Chairman, if you're happy for me to provide an update in relation to the position, I'm happy to do so.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garrett, this is an area that transferred back to the local authority about 18 months ago. It was a service that had been outsourced for a significant number of years, to the best of our digging, about 10 to 12 years, originally with the NHS Trust, then with a private company. The contract came to a natural conclusion, and we took a decision that in order to gain better control over the total landscape for people living in our communities around their social care needs, bringing the occupational therapy service back in-house provided us with an opportunity to deliver a single seamless service for people rather than them being referred through a number of different organisations. What we transferred back into the local authority was something we certainly weren't familiar with. It wasn't consistent with our local authority obligations and our systems and processes. So that's taken a bit of unpicking. And as you'd imagine, for a core group of staff who join a new organisation, there's a period of time where we saw some staff leaving, migrating back to NHS roles, and others joining. We've focused a lot of our attention on ensuring that as a local authority, we've got the right people with the right mix of skills to be able to discharge our statutory duties. And alongside that piece of work, we've been doing a deep dive and review of all of the systems and processes that team have consistently operated within. Those systems and processes aren't wrong. They're just not what we as a local authority would expect them to be. And I invited our internal audit team in to support us with that piece of work. I'm delighted that Lizzie and the team were able to accommodate my request mid-year and were able to come in and help us start to further unpick that which we were seeing and to align it more closely with the principles that this local authority looks to see in place. We have a huge service improvement plan that's been shared with our audit colleagues that the team are working towards. It is a large piece of work rather than simply pulling around the edges. We're pretty much reinventing the totality of that service. It's a large piece of transformation. I am confident that we are slowly moving in an upward trajectory to deliver the level of service and the quality of service that we as a local authority wish to ensure is accessible to our residents. It's not a short trip. It's one of those pieces of work that will continue to evolve probably over the next couple of years. But I'm optimistic that when my colleagues from internal audit come back, they will see the fruits of our labours and the improvements that are being brought to bear for local people.
Any further questions from committee? I think not. Could I just ask one question, and that's going back to the point that Councillor Churchman raised of the £385,000. You've told us that will be dealt with, I think you said, in the next audit period. Is that correct? Did I understand that correctly? Is it possible, I don't want to give you, burden you with unnecessary work, but it is quite a large amount and there has been some concern expressed. Is it possible perhaps to have a separate report just on that, drilling down on the detail as to how it's come about, whether it is just procedure, if so, in what way the procedure has failed? Or is that, would that be fully covered in the audit anyway? Because I suspect it might not go into that sort of detail. And I think the committee would like to know the detail.
Yes, as Lizzie kind of mentioned, we ranked it at medium risk because while the process wasn't followed, we weren't overly concerned with how the position we got there. But if the committee would like some more information on some of the detail behind that, then I'm sure we can provide that.
I personally think that would be helpful, and I see nods from the committee. So yes, please. That would be very, very helpful. Thank you.
No, I'd like to talk on item, is it 9, the annual audit opinion separately, please. Okay. So What we present to you here is the annual audit opinion, which we're required to do on an annual basis. And this brings together all the work we have completed in that 24-25 plan to give the council an assurance level on the internal control framework. There's a few areas I'd like to just highlight to you in this report as they have changed since last year. So for old members and new members, we are now, what question we often get asked is who audits the auditors? We have to work under the standards of the global internal audit standards. They came into effect from April 1st, 2025, and as such, we've had to make some changes to our annual audit report. So some of those changes I just wanted to highlight to you were on page 128, which is 1.18, where we give a bit more of a detail to the committee on the council's wider assurance framework. What we're trying to do here is kind of give you an understanding as to the mechanisms of the council and the risks and controls that the council does put in place before essentially we come along to audit them. Moving on to the actual opinion itself, that starts on page 132. So you'll see that we completed 52 reviews in 24-25, and within that we had 3 limited assurance audits, which are noted there as grounds maintenance, planned property, and the occupational therapy we just talked about. One area that we always focus on, and it kind of goes back to Councillor Garrett's point on the management follow-up, is that we have seen an increase in the actions closed from 45 to 55%, which obviously every time we see an improvement in that is good. We still don't want, we're not happy with 55%. We'd like it to be higher, and that is something that we'll obviously focus on with our follow-ups, but it is also a sign of good governance that we've had an improvement there, and management are taking actions seriously and completing them in the times they state. So with that in mind, we are giving the council a reasonable assurance opinion on that control framework again this year, which is the same as what we gave in the previous year. Moving on, the report kind of gives you lots of different statistics as to the exception levels, where they've been in what different areas. As I mentioned, the areas of key concern on page 136 of your pack are the 3 limited assurance audits we had throughout the year. Moving on to section 11, which is page 145. This year, we've also done a bit of work on value for money, where we've looked at bringing together all the value for money elements that have been picked up in various audits to kind of give the committee an overview of what we think on value for money from our results. And then lastly, section 12, starting at page 149 of your pack, is a summary of the counter fraud work that we also provide for the council on an annual basis. Happy to take any further questions on the annual opinion.
Councillor Churchman.
Yes, page 136. We rely on a tourist economy, and looking at the key areas of concern, I'm very concerned. If you don't maintain property, it falls down around your ears. If you own a house, you're continually at it, keeping it in good repair. Otherwise, you end up with colossal bills. So I just find this very, very difficult to understand why it has got into the state that it has. As I said, as a tourist island, we need, for example, to keep our footpaths clear. We won't talk about PFI, but basically hedgerows, etc. But it's just the planned maintenance of property that also really does concern me. Things don't get better, they get worse. And in the end, if you don't keep up with them, they cost you twice as much as if you keep a planned maintenance schedule in place. Thank you.
Yeah, may I respond to that, just to provide some reassurance to the committee?
Of course.
I just want to reassure you, Councillor Churchman, that we do have a planned property maintenance schedule. So each year we look at the risk factors that are the potential risk factors of issues with property, and we record them on our schedule, and subsequently we make bids for funding through the budget setting exercise to remedy those situations.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Councillor Adams.
You say you look for funding. I feel with some of these issues, we have various properties throughout my parish which need some attention. And I just wondered, is one of the options for looking at these funding issues, could this be raised from the pension fund with what's going on? Is that a viable alternative to some of the funding streams, considering how we've spoke about the pension fund earlier?
I mean, the short answer to that is no. In terms of the pension fund investments, it goes through a very thorough due diligence process that seeks to obtain the best return for the pension fund members for a commensurate level of risk that the pension fund committee is willing to take. There is in terms of moving forward, there is the within the new framework, there will be opportunity, as there is now to an extent, for what's called local investment, but it depends what you term as local. That will be something that in effect is managed by the new pool. Certainly the diligence arrangements in terms of where to invest and where not to invest. If there was an opportunity to invest locally, for example, not on the island, and that might be set out, for example, in the Isle of Wight pension funds investment strategy, it would still have to go through that proper due diligence process to ensure that there is a proper return that is made for the members. Because as you'll appreciate, and I think as was mentioned earlier on, it's the members' money and it's the members' future benefits that's important. And our obligation as officers and trustees of the pension fund is to ensure that ultimately members receive a pension and that all decisions are made with that fiduciary duty in mind, really, which is what is the best outcome for the members. So in short, the answer is not directly. It would have to go through a proper due diligence process.
Would I come back with a supplementary? I really appreciate that, Chris, and I know it's far from simple in my limited experience as a councillor, but what concerns me is the island, like most of England, we have a severe housing crisis. And I'm concerned over our numbers of people in B&Bs and caravans and various other temporary accommodation. And I just feel we have an option here at the present moment in time we've spoke about it in full council several times, for some relocatable housing. I think this is could be a real money spinner for the council, and it's something we're keeping in hand. We would be keeping our land rather than the asset disposal scheme, which we currently seem to go down. And I just think it would be nice, reassuring to me as a councillor to know that you, as our Section 151 officer, was exploring that avenue in a little bit deeper detail than it's been into at the moment.
Yeah, of course, nobody's suggesting that the pension fund couldn't be used for affordable housing in its broadest sense or its narrowest sense. It would just have to go through that due diligence process, because we have got those fiduciary duties to the members of the pension fund first and foremost. So that's the lens under which any potential investment would be viewed.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. One thing that I did find interesting was paragraph 13.8 on page 157, just around the development of the audit team. That sounds like excellent practice to do that. I just wonder, and I think back to my time when I was in your position, Chair, that I started discussions with the Chief Internal Auditor about following an audit through its process. Now, that would have been quite lengthy, and other things happened. But I wonder if actually in some of these things that are being identified for staff learning internally, if there might be a mind given to where it might be helpful to the members to understand the work of the team from the outside. Obviously, our role is not operational. We're not there to do that, but to actually understand what auditors are doing and the types of questions they're going through. So I just throw that in there as something to consider. Maybe there's something, an informal members briefing to this committee at some point on something that particularly highlighted the way in which the team works.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a problem. We're more than happy to provide some training on how we go about our process to the committee, whether that be informally via a meeting or individual councillors. If we want to sit down and have that conversation, we're more than happy to talk through the process we go through.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Garrett. Would be very helpful, I think. Thank you. Unless there are any further questions, I think we can move on. Item 10, Strategic Risk Register, pages 165 to 192. Councillor Churchwell.
Just a comment on page 158. It's good to know the last paragraph, the fact that we are looking forward, and congratulations to the people who are doing it and achieving it. Thank you, Chair.
So Ms. Downer, I understand you're going to produce this report for us, and if you could follow the course perhaps that we've already taken of just a brief summary and any future thoughts, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The Strategic Risk Register is a regular report that comes to the Audit Committee. It's a vital tool in the Council's governance framework and is designed to help identify, assess and manage the most significant risks that could impact the achievement of the authority's strategic objectives. These risks are typically high level and long term in nature, and by maintaining a strategic risk register, the Council ensures that it remains proactive in recognising potential risks and threats and in implementing appropriate mitigating strategies. Following the previous committee meeting, the risk register has been fully reviewed. The risk register is managed through our corporate management team, and ownership of the individual risks are assigned to the directors and statutory officers. For the Audit and Governance Committee, the Strategic Risk Register provides an essential oversight. It enables members to monitor how effectively strategic risks are being managed, challenges assumptions, and ensure that the risk management is embedded across the organisation. Within the report, you'll see a full list of all the changes from last time because it was quite a significant review was undertaken. So hopefully that will help you review the changes that have been made. And for you, Chair, I'd be more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Chapman.
Slightly offbeat. I understand the council are talking about employing somebody to deal with smoking inside the council. How does that come up in your risk register? And surely it'd be cheaper to just put up no smoking signs everywhere.
It doesn't actually appear as a strategic risk on the risk register. Therefore, it's not within the report nor within the remit of that particular area. Smoking cessation is not considered to be a strategic risk at this point in time, and therefore it's not on the register and isn't part of this particular report. But Chair, would that be a more appropriate question for Adult Social Care or Public Health Wellbeing Committee?
Perhaps in view of the reply, I think that's probably the case, that it's perhaps a good question, but perhaps more appropriate for another committee. But thank you for raising it nevertheless. Any further questions on this report? Yep. Thank you very much.
It's less of a question. Obviously, Ms. Downer knows that I pay great attention to the risk register over time and the way in which it evolves and changes. One of the things I'm very aware of, we're now into a different governance situation with a committee structure rather than a cabinet-led system with oversight and scrutiny. I think so I particularly have in mind just to sort of like say, it is not just CMT, not just corporate management team that will be looking at these sorts of things. All of those committees will have some sight of the strategic risks, but also what, for example, one thing that Policy, Finance and Resources will want to look at has having oversight on the budget preparation process, working with the Section 151 officer and his team. And informally, we've already, as members, had some discussion around the capacity of the organisation and our desire to work with the lead officers to ensure that as the budget process goes through, that we are addressing to some extent those areas of capacity. And you may have noticed, members may have noticed, back on the previous reports, there are a couple of mentions around capacity of the organisation. This isn't just something that comes to CMT and then quarterly to this committee. It is something that is in the minds, I'm sure, of Policy, Finance and Resources Committee members, and is in the minds of all those members who are now collectively the ones responsible for executive decision making. So, but otherwise, it is a lengthy document. It always is a lengthy document. It does set out things very, very clearly. I think that's evolved over the last 4 years, and I can look forward to it continuing to evolve. Finally, Chair, it's for you to decide how you wish to do your work. But one thing I did find useful was to sit in on CMT at the invitation of the Chief Executive, just to see their discussion of the risk register, and to be assured myself that they were having a due and proper regard, which they were, to that register. So it may be something you would want to add to your work plan.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett, for mentioning that to me, and I shall certainly take that on board. Thank you. Councillor Critchison.
Yes, sorry, just a comment. It wasn't really a question, just that there are some high areas and new risks in there that I think we should keep an eye on really over the course and come back to those at the next committee. Yeah, thank you.
There is a recommendation in the report. Previous reports we simply noted, but the recommendation is that we agree that we are assured that the strategic risks of the council are properly outlined and monitored as set out in Appendix 1 of the report. So, subject to the approval of the committee, I would recommend that we follow that recommendation and approve it. Subject perhaps to some of the comments that have been made today, including helpfully by Councillor Garrett about a variety of matters, and also the last question, or at least last comment, by Councillor Critchison. Yes, I see a general nod, so I think we can take that as recommended, perhaps with those provisos. Thank you. Takes us to item 11, the draft annual governance statement, pages 193 to 216. And I see that's Mrs. Downer again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is a regular report in terms of it comes to this committee every year, or initially comment and then sign off. So the annual governance statement, or the AGS as I'll refer to it, is a statutory requirement under the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015. It provides a detailed account of how the authority has fulfilled its governance responsibilities over the past year. It evaluates the effectiveness of our internal controls, risk management processes and decision-making frameworks, many of which you've heard about today. And it also highlights any areas for improvement and sets out actions to strengthen governance going forward. The Audit and Governance Committee plays a pivotal role in reviewing the annual governance statement, and your scrutiny ensures that the statement accurately reflects the authority's governance performance and that any identified issues are addressed appropriately. This process not only supports good governance, but also reinforces public trust in the council's operations and decision making. This draft report is provided to you for comment. Any comment will be reviewed in preparation for the final statement, which will accompany the final accounts when these are presented to you, the committee. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Questions from any committee members?
My only comments on that was that we kind of covered those in looking at the
Yes.
audit reports earlier.
Exactly.
That if the external auditors were happy with where things were, that actually reassured me that we were covering that at this stage.
I
Point of
agree.
view. That's
I agree. I was looking at a note that I've got.
the only notes I've made. Kind of thing. Yeah. Thank you.
I agree, Councillor Critches. I'm looking at a note that I've got for 6.2 and 6.4, but then when I looked it up now, I see that it's been dealt with in the process. So it doesn't seem to me there's really, the only other ones I had, again, have been dealt with, the issues of fraud, not that they're, but just the governance in relation to fraud, 9.1, and paragraph 8 and 9.1. But again, it's been really covered, it seems to me. So unless anyone has any comments or any questions, I think we simply noting this one.
Yeah. Discussions, not really.
Yeah. Well, I think there is, Megan very kindly points out, there is a recommendation, but we have, as I think, really covered that. The Audit and Governance Committee review the annual governance statement, provide an additional comment or feedback to be included in the final statement, which will be presented with the final accounts. I mean, I think the note from, suggested note from Councillor Critchison is helpful. So that the governance report takes into account, as it were, anything raised in the ongoing audit reports. That would be very helpful. Thank you. We all in agreement with that? Seems so. Thank you.
Chair, shall I introduce that report? Thank you.
Thank you.
So you have before you the annual report on the performance of our property investment portfolio. And this report is for noting and provides the committee members with an update on the mainland property investments between the 1st of April 24 and March 25. So some key points for noting are that the gross income received during that period was £2.17 million. The net income was £1.9 million, and that represents a 5.6% return. The market value of the properties has increased now, and that's 37.13 million, and that's 1.96 million more than the amount that it was acquired for. So the portfolio is achieving the aim of securing an income stream which contributes to the future sustainability of the island services. So I don't know, I think it's doing very well. And I don't know if there's any further questions to be asked on that. Thank you.
Have any questions on that? Councillor Critchison.
Yeah, I just want to ask, is it doing as expected? And is this still the best option to keep it and have it running as it is currently? Thank you.
I have the 151 officer sitting next to me, but I'll do the layman's version, and Chris can correct me if I say anything untoward. But yes, I think under the So under the current circumstances, it is delivering what the aim was anticipated to be, which is fulfilling a revenue income. And the value of the portfolio is increasing, and we're getting income in. So it's doing well and practicing well.
Yeah, I'll just supplement that. A couple of key points, really. The first is that it's providing the council with about £1.2 million to support its services at the moment. So the net surplus that's made from the property portfolio is about £1.2 million. So without that £1.2 million, we'd have to reduce services by an equivalent amount. So in that sense, that's positive. The valuation side is also positive because if the property market has been particularly challenged, particularly over the last few years, and I think what you're seeing in terms of the valuation of the property is that it's an appreciating asset, whereas elsewhere nationally, you'll probably see either property values either being flat or reduced slightly. So it's probably, I would suggest it's probably outperformed the market in terms of value, but it is a valuable income source to the council.
Thank you. That's the reassurance I kind of wanted. Thank you.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. If we were to seek to sell these properties, given the valuation, how much of that would be a net receipt to the council, and how much would have to be then? I believe it's going back some years now, isn't it, to this decision? How much would still have to service a loan or loans on this?
Yeah, the net receipt would be between 1.5 and 2 million. The remainder of, assuming that that is the value that the assets were sold for, of course, the remainder of it would be used to repay debt. Which
suggests to me not offloading them at this moment in time because of the amount of receipt we're getting annually. Would that be a reasonable suggestion?
I think that's true. You would have a one-off 1.5 to £2 million capital receipt that you could only use for new capital investment. I don't think you would get any investment that the council was allowed to enter into that would yield a net £1.2 million from, you know, it's a payback of just under 2 years, isn't it, or just over a year. So I think it's at the moment the alternative in terms of trying to replace that income would be quite difficult to achieve.
Of course.
So what were the long-term plans for it? Is there any, is this what it is? Was it just to see how it performed? And just given that it says costs will decrease hopefully over time. So if that's happening, I wasn't sure what the long-term plan was, or as whether that has changed.
Yeah, the plan hasn't changed. When the council acquired these investments, it was at a time where local authorities were able to borrow purely for financial return. These investments were purely for financial return. They were part of the council's medium-term financial strategy to generate additional income in order to support the delivery of council services. That objective hasn't changed. What has changed, of course, is the regulations which don't allow councils to do the same anymore. There is no opportunity for councils to borrow money for purely financial gain anymore. So there's no opportunity to expand the portfolio. But when we undertook the initial evaluation of those properties, we undertook the evaluation with what we describe as a holding period in mind, and we had evaluated it over the holding period. So typically that might be a hold period for a property of, say, 10 years. And then you would time that event, that holding period, to time with what's described as a lease event. So you do it at the time where you've just gone through a lease evaluation or a rent review. They then have greater value, and then that's the point in time that you might seek to sell, because it's an optimum value time. So we're still within the same you know, we still have the same strategy, which is to hold the properties until such time actually as it becomes not a good property portfolio management reason to retain it. And then we'd seek to divest.
The questions from the committee. Some couple of brief questions from me, if I may. I mean, there is a feeling amongst some councillors and also residents, indeed, that the island should be investing in properties on the island rather than mainland. I anticipate that you would say, no doubt, that certainly at the time we could get a better return from mainland properties and mainland income. Is that still the case, or is there scope for investing, should there be an opportunity to make future investments by purchasing land and or properties, obviously, on the island?
Yeah, there's the government have tightened the rules around this following a number of failures, really, in terms of the property investment market, some of which I'm sure you'll be well aware of, and particularly those local authorities that invested in retail, where the values actually fell through the floor. Some councils had significant losses to the extent that it sent them into Section 114 territory. So the government have outlined the ability for local authorities to be able to borrow for investment purposes purely for a financial return. What councils can do is they can invest for what's described as a primary purpose, where financial return, you can still make a financial return, but that effectively has to be a byproduct of the investment, not a direct objective of the investment, but you've still got to demonstrate that any investment that you make is for a policy purpose. So it could be for regeneration, for example. So it is possible to invest for regeneration, but we would have to go through our own tests to make sure that as a consequence of that investment, that it's for a direct policy purpose, and two, that there would be some additionality associated with it, whether it be economic or social additionality, but not if its only objective or its primary objective was for financial return. So I hope, the making the direct comparison between the investments that the council has on the mainland and whether it can do the same on the island, the answer is that's now been ruled out. There isn't that opportunity anymore.
Thank you. And just a further question from me, and that is, presumably in the portfolio, one looks at individual properties. It's not simply a question of changing the entire portfolio, but individual properties. So, for example, I notice under rental income, 2 tenants are in administration. How is that approached if they're in administration? Because it takes quite a long time to sort that out.
Yeah, I mean, if you look to paragraph 11 of the report, that effectively describes what the investment strategy is and was. Obviously, part of that investment strategy would be covenant strength. But you're always seeking to take a balanced position in the portfolio. So that's a balanced position in terms of understand what the overall size of your portfolio is, then have lot sizes within that mean that you're not overextended, so that you've got reasonable diversification in that sense. You've got reasonable geographic diversification. You've got reasonable diversification in terms of the strength of the organizations as well. But as you start a portfolio, you start on a safe foundation, and you only get into diversification into kind of more risky covenants as you build the portfolio and you've got the solidity of the portfolio. If an organization goes into administration, obviously we will seek to retain our rights and we'll seek to enforce our rights, and we will want to turn that asset over as quickly as possible so that it remains revenue generating. So there is an asset management aspect to it, but we have to make sure that that's properly observed.
Councillor Richardson.
Chair, back to your other point, Chris, that we have invested in property on the island, but that was for a policy reason for the housing issues. So that is what we have done recently, I believe. So we can't do it like you were just explaining. So we have done some of that. And I just wanted to make the point that we have, but it's in a different way. But the income is sort of internal with covering costs, but not, well, potentially on the value of the property in the long term, but that's not the reason we've done it. Does that make sense? Is that right? Just to, you might understand
Absolutely
myself.
right. Yeah, no, it's absolutely right, Councillor Richardson. So the council has invested in housing on the island. It has used a mixture of borrowing and cash because there isn't I think I've mentioned this before, there isn't a viable model for providing affordable housing that is 100% borrowing. The rents just don't support the borrowing costs. They're way below. And broadly speaking, in the current climate, you can only expect the available rent to cover half of the borrowing cost. And that's not a position that's unique to the island. But if you have a mixed funding package, which is borrowing and cash, the cash, of course, comes from the council's resources. So there's always the choice about where to deploy any cash available the council has. Does it deploy it to housing? Does it deploy it to another priority of the council that might be around adult social care, for example, children's social care? Could be around transport, could be any manner of things, and the council has many priorities. But there is a model where the council have borrowed to invest in property for affordable housing. But of course, you do need cash to supplement it in order to make it viable, because the rules around borrowing are, well, I think of it in my mind, I remember the abbreviation SFA. So it has to be sustainable, has to be prudent, and it has to be affordable. And in that situation, you have to make sure that you can afford the debt repayments on a long-term basis, which means it has to wash its face, because all the time the council has got forecast deficits in the future, you cannot demonstrate that you can afford to be paying additional borrowing costs. So yeah, they're the rules called the Prudential Code. So all of our borrowing effectively has to be affordable by the council. You have to be able to demonstrate it.
Sorry, Chris, I've got to come back with this one because when we talk about regeneration and social gain, surely there can be no more benefit than providing social housing. And I'm saying social because I really don't like the term affordable, because I don't believe there's any affordable housing for people in need. And when we talk about sustainable models, is that looked at in the context of, if we're developing Isle of Wight Council owned land, are we looking at that opportunity? Because I really feel we need to explore this. I'm sorry to keep going on about it, but I just feel it's important, and it comes up time and time again.
No, it's absolutely an important matter, and there's no doubt about it that one of the most challenging positions for the island is let's call it social housing, affordable housing. And again, so you will find that in other authorities across the country. But the council has a number of other statutory duties. The provision of affordable housing isn't a council statutory duty. So there's obvious choices for the council to make. The council has to make its decisions about, in terms of the available funds it has, whether it be for revenue or for capital, where to allocate that funding. Should it be to adult social care, where we know there are continuing pressures year on year? Should it be to children's social care? Should it be to transport? Should it be to libraries? Should it be to waste collection? Should it be to... There's a whole range of priorities that the council will have to manage, and you have to weigh all of these things. You have to weigh all of these things up. I don't think there's not a council in the country that has a single narrow focus on one single objective, because what you couldn't rationally do as a council is direct all of the available funding towards one priority and then fail in your statutory duty. That's a recipe for an intervention by central government. So nobody's saying the choices are easy. They are certainly not easy, but I think you have to take a balanced view on what all of the council's priorities are.
Supplementary or no? Just following up on that, just briefly, I don't think it's really the ambit of this committee to get too heavily involved in social housing versus adult social care, for example. But one, I would only make this point really, although as I understand it, a saving on temporary accommodation isn't something, I think your advice is that's not something that can be offset against a loan, but it can be taken into account, obviously, to this extent that I entirely accept that the statutory duties have to be performed, but to this extent, expenditure up to the money that would be saved, so capital expenditure up to the money that would be saved by not having to pay for people in temporary accommodation, would be arguably a proper payment of capital, because there is actually up to that limit no expenditure effectively, because the two cancel themselves out.
Yeah, I agree. It can be. But what we have to demonstrate is that we can, like I said, that we can afford the borrowing. That would mean that we would have to take some of the budget from anything that is, take some of the budget away from temporary accommodation and place it in our budget for repayment of debt. It's the only way that we can demonstrate that we can afford the repayment of the debt. And if I said to an officer, okay, this is great, we are going to invest in this housing, it's going to relieve us of a significant amount of cost on the temporary accommodation budget, I have to be assured that I can take that budget away from temporary accommodation and it's not going to be replaced. You know, the demand is not going to be replaced. If the demand is going to be replaced, the cost remains and I then can't take the budget away. So we have a mechanism to deal with this, but it's not always as simple as being able to say, I can take that money away from temporary accommodation. If I can, great, no problem whatsoever, and you can borrow against it. If I can't take it away, I can't demonstrate I've got the money to pay for the debt.
I understand that. I suspect, and as I say, I don't think it's really for this committee, but I suspect there may be further conversations in the future, given that the land disposal policy has now passed through full council. So I think those are probably conversations to have elsewhere and in the future. But thank you for your explanation. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Item 13, Procurement Half-Yearly Report, pages 229. And it's Mr. Downer.
Sorry, Chair. I think it's half-yearly report is to myself, Steve Sandercock, and also Leslie Kinnear is on the call as well, Chair. So if you're happy, I'll do an introductory to this report, and then we're more than happy to take any questions that may arise on the back of that. It's a regular report, half-yearly report to Audit and Governance Committee. It sets out the procurement activity that's happened during the last half year for the council. It includes details around the number of and the value of contracts that have been awarded. It also outlines the current value of contracts that are on the council's contract register, which is part of their transparency requirements, plus the number and value of waivers to the contract standing orders that have been agreed in line with the waiver and transparency policy. Plus, this also sets out the number of step up and step down placement arrangements within the adults arena and also children's placements as well. Within this report, it sets out in Appendix 3 the final outcomes around the progress of the council's activity on the procurement strategy, and it should be noted that the strategy as set out ends this year, so 2025. So I would imagine this will be the last formal update with regards to the current strategy as it stands. I would just note that the recommendation is for noting in the actual report itself. It does make reference only to Appendix 1, but there are 3 appendices to this report, so it would be noting the information contained in both Appendix 1, 2, and 3. So at that point, Chair, I shall pause and happily take any questions. If we can answer them, then we'll certainly do that. If not, we'll take away any points of detail.
Thank you very much. Questions, Councillor Adams?
I notice in the residential placements, which I don't understand in the figures, the disparity between, we've got one residential placement, EF 17606236, £8,420, placed on the 20th of the 3rd, 25. Another residential placement underneath it, KM 17642829, £258,419.52 on the 24th of the 10th, 24. How can there be such a disparity in these? I just can't, I'm struggling to build a picture and understand these figures that are in front of me.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I mean, with regards to the specific details behind those, each placement will depend on individual needs. I would certainly look to ultimately defer to the service area around those for specific details. I don't know if Laura's in the room.
She was here, but I think she's now left.
She may well have left. If I can if I can take the details of those individual ones, we're more than happy to provide a nondescript, if you like, without disclosing any individual personal details around those cases. But cab and placement packages will vary greatly in regards to individual circumstances and needs. But we're more than happy to provide a summary of why there is a difference between those 2 placements, if that would be helpful.
Councillor Adams, do you have a supplementary or a comment on whether that would be helpful?
It would be helpful, and being frank, and I don't want to be disrespectful, I appreciate there's differences, but I feel we need a full breakdown on this, because these sums, they're astronomical. They just look astronomical, and if that is one placement, 258,000, I just find it mind-boggling.
Hi there, just to add, it's Leslie here as well, Leslie Kinnair from Procurement. The one thing that varies a lot from the placements for all of them is some are for a week, some are for a month, some are for a year. So there is a lot of variance. They do range from a few thousand right up to 100 and 200 plus thousand. It's quite a common thing, so it would likely be down to time and specialism of that. But as Steve says, we can pull the data on that. But just to let you know, that's probably likely to be around that.
Yeah, we'll certainly get back with some more detail. Thank you, Leslie.
Councillor Churchman.
last year, Councillor Garrett will remember, I did request that we consider very, very, well, not quickly, but building a care home of our own on the island for children. We do have land that we could use. I don't know if anything was ever done about it, but it would make sense. When we look at these figures, they are astronomical. So if we built a children's care home to take care of our own, we would also attract probably people, councils from across the water, because most councils have exactly the same problems. So I would like to know if anything was ever done about this, whether it was considered. I think the land mentioned at the time, Councillor Garrett, was up just beyond where the council office are, where Island Roads are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Churchman. That would certainly be a service-specific question. I would look to, for that matter, if Democratic Services could refer that matter to the Director of Children's Services, and if at all possible, it would be helpful where that reference was made, in which committee. I'm assuming it would be Audit and Governance Committee, but which particular committee? So again, that you know, the director can then provide a formal response around that particular point.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. I think both Councillors Adams and Churchman have highlighted something that we need to be having in mind going forward from this through the budget setting process. I think the substance of both questions actually probably more rightly lies out with this committee and with another committee. In terms of the specifics of those things. But I think it could be very helpful to all members actually of this council to understand the variations in costs of things. One thing I would be particularly aware of, though, that just referencing residential accommodation doesn't in any way explain the needs of the person being placed. And also, what Councillor Adams has actually helpfully highlighted is actually the extent to which all local authorities are buffeted by the winds of expenses of certain placements, both in adults and in children's services. We do our best as a council, do we not, to budget for those? But I think every year that I've spent in local government on and off, it's always been the case that there are pressures on adults and children's services, partly brought about because we just cannot predict who will come to us with a need and what their needs will be. And those needs are expensive. Anyone who's ever looked, for example, at just residential care in a care home for an older relative will realize that it is expensive to provide even that level of service. So imagine then the additional needs that some people do have. But I think in terms of, as a member of the Policy and Finance and Resource Committee, I think that'd be something that could be very helpfully done to educate, and well, we're all educated, but to remind all of the members of all of the committees, which have a really key role, which is different from the cabinet system in setting the budget, to how those sorts of pressures emerge and are mitigated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I think my comment was there has been a procurement briefing to another committee, I believe, and I think that would be useful for this committee as well, but perhaps all members briefing about the procurement role and how that fits with the other departments and areas. And that might make it easier for us to unpick some of these details. I think I had another question, but my computer's just gone off, so I can't remember what I was going to say. But it was generally around that actually, as we go through these figures, it would be useful to have that in the context of the role of the procurement team. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair, as well. I'll just respond around that point. Yes, an individual briefing was requested by the Adults and Social Care Committee, or I'm not necessarily sure whether I got the full title of that correct, but we certainly have provided an update around the changes around the procurement legislation, and we've made a sort of an offer back through to Democratic Services that we could look to roll that out to all members if that would be deemed helpful, and certainly we would welcome your steer on that, and more than happy to to put something in either committee specific or for all members as well.
Thank you. Yes, I request that, please, officially. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll take that point on board.
Are there any further questions, or are we happy to content to note the report and again with the comments that the committee has made individually, in principle, in the main, Councillors Churchman, Pritchardson and Councillor Adams' points, and indeed I'm not saying that Councillor Garrett's points weren't worth noting, but they were perhaps more of an observation than a request. So, but with those requests, we'll note this report. And thank you very much for reporting on that matter for us.
Thank you.
Moving now to review of the Constitution, to receive any verbal update from me. I don't have any formal update. I see that Claire Shand is online, and maybe it would be helpful. It occurs to me, and of course there'll be further input no doubt from members of the committee, but it does occur to me that there are two aspects of the Constitution which will need to be updated. The largest issue, I'm afraid, is having hurried all this time to put into place the committee system. We're now going to have to hurry, according to central government, to have a return to the cabinet and leader system, with the necessary changes to the Constitution being made. I think it is in time for May of next year. So I would appreciate from Mrs. Shand any timetable or comments on that. The other thing is that the planning protocol, which won't really be affected directly by a return to a cabinet and leader system, does need some continued updating. It was perhaps a limited update, as it were, from the planning protocol for the purposes of meeting the time limit. But there are items there. My suggestion is we could form a subcommittee to look at the planning protocol, but I'd welcome perhaps your help, please, and advice on how we're going to go about setting a new constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me to speak. That's much appreciated. As you presented two issues there, first of which I think it's important to reference that when the current constitution was approved at annual council, the report clearly indicated that this was the beginning of the process in terms of delivering the new constitution, and that we would want to take opportunity to reflect on operational experience of the new practices and procedures once they were in place. So officers have been working in the background to prepare a remit for that 6-month review to commence, and had planned to bring to the Audit and Governance Committee, with your permission, Chair, a report that outlines how we intend to conduct that together with the Audit and Governance Committee, and which would inevitably include a similar working group that we had previously, that enabled us to get steer and direction in terms of the key areas for development and review. So I would certainly see that there is plenty of opportunity for us to consider how well the new system is going, to pick up on the what we call the snagging list that still exists, that there were some things that were not possible to conclude in a timely manner to get the main parts of the Constitution approved in readiness for May. So there is a list of things that we are already starting to look at. So I would hope, with your indulgence, Chair, that we would be able to bring that report in consultation, obviously, with yourselves to the September committee meeting that will help to shape that review take place. And as you rightly point out, we're also mindful of the fact that central government has indicated that they propose a change back to a leader and cabinet system. I have seen the drafts of the bill that is being prepared, and that's publicly available for anyone to see. And it's anyone's guess as to how long that bill will take before it gets to its final stages. My reading of it at this moment in time is that there will be a 12-month period upon which the bill is passed to return to a leader and cabinet system. Understandably, though, we wouldn't necessarily be wanting to wait until such bill is laid before Parliament and approved, and would certainly see that as part of the work that we're doing for the review of the Constitution in its current form, we'll be looking ahead to what we would need to do to return to a leader and cabinet system. So I hope that gives you, chairs and committee, with some level of assurance that we are already taking those factors into account, and that we will be in a position to bring to you at your September meeting of an outline plan of how we intend to do that with you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I'll just see if there's any committee members who have any questions on that. Councillor Churchman.
Obviously, it's very concerning. Is there any chance that we could be exempted from a 2026 return to leader cabinet system because we have just introduced a committee? Could we appeal to the government to give us an extra year? I'm thinking of the workload on officers. I mean, it's been colossal. And I think you've done such hard work and delivered something, and it's taken, what, 2 years minimum? So could we appeal to the government? Is it worth the effort? My second point would be, could we not just poach somebody else's constitution? Well, why not? I'm thinking of a very similar council to our own, which is Bracknell New Forest. They're roughly the same size of us, and I don't know which system they have. But if they had a cabinet system, then could we not just poach whatever they're doing and obviously alter it possibly to suit the island? Would save a lot of time, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I will ask Mrs. Sham to respond, but if I may just initially, I think.
Yeah, of course.
I think we can certainly ask the government. I don't want to get into political comment, but whether or not they will be favourably received remains to be seen. But if you don't ask, as the old saying goes, you don't get. So I suppose it might be worth asking. As far as your other point, Councillor Judgman, there are fairly standard templates for constitutions. And it may be that the workload wouldn't be quite so enormous if one, I take your point, used one of those templates and then altered it to the specific sort of requirements of the council. But I think we would have to work, subject to anything that Mrs. Shand says, I think we would have to work really to, unless we were to receive a clear indication from the council, we need to put it in hand sooner rather than later, so that we don't end up having a terrible rush at the very end to draft the new constitution to return to cabinet and leadership, which does seem to be the clear intention of the government. I don't know, Mr. Shand, if you've got any addition to that. If so, please do.
Thank you. Yes, and I think we are a bit in crystal ball territory at this particular moment in time, unfortunately. But agree that there's no harm in asking. But I suspect we will be expected to abide by whatever central government set out in terms of its new provisions. What I would hope is that what we can do is benefit from the change process that we've been through, and I would hope that from the exercise that we undertake that we can extract the good things from operating under the new governance system and build upon our old constitution, which has obviously the provisions for leader and cabinet model of governance too. Anything that we can gain from other sources is of course of benefit. But the important thing is that we have a constitution that works for this local authority. And whilst there are some things that are pretty standard in governance arrangements, there is some degree of flexibility in terms of adapting to specific local needs. So we would want to make sure that we covered all of those considerations as part of that new programme of work. There's no clear indication at this moment in time that we will have to have it ready by next May. But if that is the requirement, we would want to be as prepared as we possibly can be.
I agree entirely. I don't know if the committee has any further questions or clarification. Councillor Garrett.
Chair, I would just reinforce, as someone who has been through that lengthy process that Councillor Churchman alluded to, in quite a bit of detail, working with Mr. Shand and others and my colleagues. You resisted being political, but I think it is political and party political are two different things, and I think it is right to make the political point that we here have made a decision as a local authority that we believe our governance would be better if it were under a committee system, and that is what we are now operating. And I do find it odd that a central government that is wishing to devolve power down is seizing power back to impose a system of government on authorities such as our own. That said, Parliament is sovereign and gets to do what it likes for the most part, and we have to bend to their will. I think Claire Shand has made the right points. We did have a cabinet system constitution up until May the 21st this year. I think the key point that she's made, I would make as well, which is we learn from what we intended to achieve in terms of culture and ethos for the committee system, such that when we have to re-adopt a cabinet member system, we can bring some of that in, but also study some of the things that the government has said around the mayoral side of things. So it has talked, I believe I recall correctly, around enabling local area committees to still exist under cabinet member systems, and those certainly have been adopted, and that might be something that we may need to look at in terms of being able to achieve some form of hybrid between the cabinet system and the one that we have at the moment. I haven't seen the draft bill. I wonder if Mr. Shand could tell me which bill name it is. I was trying to find the draft bill.
Yeah, I'll happily send you the link through.
Yeah, that would be great, so we can understand that. Parliamentary time being what it is, we will not know how quickly the government will wish to proceed on this, although it has talked in other places of making sure things don't happen until 2027. So we may have 2 years under this council set of elections as well, and perhaps potentially another year to at least develop the culture that we wish to take forward in terms of the cabinet system. But like I say, government gets its way, doesn't it? And maybe a future government will do as the coalition government did in 2011 and bring in a provision to allow for committee systems to once again be restored. And we'll have this kind of ping pong of governance ping pong. And I'm sure that would delight the officers present.
All in a day's work.
Yeah. Comes to mind that your retirement might be further put on hold, I think, Mrs. Shand.
I can't possibly comment.
Well, I think unless any other members of the committee have anything further on item 14, I think we've probably gone as far as that as we can, unless on the planning protocol issue, Megan, do we need formally to set up a subcommittee, or can we just go ahead with that? The way that the informal subcommittee worked last time was that we had a committee of people, and that I chaired it, and I put together my suggested amendments, and we then discussed those at various meetings. And I would have thought we could continue with that. So I don't know, do we need to say any more about it than we've already said at this meeting? And I see.
Yes, Chair, and I'm sure Claire will come in on this. I would express some caution about the phrasing that's being used about the subcommittee, which would then be a formal committee of, or subcommittee of this committee, which would then be subject to, proper governance and issue of summons, et cetera, and production of reports through our governance routines. Obviously, there are other routes where you don't need to go through that, which I'm sure Claire will allude to if she needs to. But use of subcommittees, I would express a bit of caution.
Thank you. I'm grateful for that. I suppose we could call it, what could we call it then? A task and finish group, or just an informal revision of the planning protocol?
Chair, if I may suggest, and this is entirely up to you, but we can include it as part of our considerations around the 6-month review, if that's helpful, and we can determine a means by which that work can be undertaken.
I think that would be very helpful, and any informal group, let's put it like that, the outcome of their work could be referred to you, so that we and perhaps have a discussion about it. But that's a very helpful suggestion. So
that's
thank
fine.
you. Yeah. That's probably as far as we need to go on review of the Constitution. And that leaves us with the final item for the agenda, item 15, work plan, pages 263 onwards. I don't know if there are any additions that are needed or requested to the work plan that any members of the committee have at the moment, or whether or not, Megan, there's anything that you would advise us that we need to consider for our work plan. I don't think from the answers of Mrs. Shand, I don't think we need to include constitutional revision or the planning protocol revision as in our work plan necessarily, subject to perhaps scheduling it to come into a meeting at the appropriate time. I see another intervention.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just reviewing your work plan, I note right at the bottom of your work plan, it already has an item on there for future governance update listed for the September committee, I believe, which is the report that Claire Shand alluded to earlier, that will update on the progress of the review. So that is the route back from the discussions going on in the informal side back through committee, because obviously it does need to go back through this committee. It cannot all be done informally. So that is the report that Claire was referring to earlier. It's already listed on your work plan.
Don't need to add anything to that. Thank you.
Chairman, I think some of the items down for external audit over the course of the next year need tidying up in terms of which year and to what committees we need to bring them as the legislation changes the dates over the next few years. So if that's okay, we'll update that and provide that through after the meeting to Democratic Services.
Be very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Souter. Yeah. Does anyone else have any suggestions and or, as it were, additions to the work plan? Well, subject to those additions, the work plan remains as is, and that concludes this meeting. I'd just like to say before we rise, although some of the members in this committee, some of the members have changed, I would just like to express the thanks of the committee to Councillor Garrett for his hard work and chairing of this committee over, I think, quite a substantial time. And as I said before, it's good to have him on board for what is perhaps a new committee, new in inverted commas. So thank you. I think that's it. I'll bang this and then we can all go home.